The reading's taken from the Gospel of Mark. If you want to follow it in a Bible from underneath the seat in front of you, it's on page 50. It's Mark 14, beginning to read at verse 43. And it's set in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus has been praying and the disciples have been asleep. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. And with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." All of them deserted him and fled. A certain young man was following him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Jill. Am I on? Perfect. Let's get this out of the way. Okay. So, when Daniel told me that I was speaking on my last Sunday, he also gave me a great privilege of choosing my own passage on my own topic. Hey, Sophie. And I wanted to revisit the Gospel of Mark. So we did Mark in the spring sermon series, and I felt like I had a bit of unfinished business with it. We're going back to it. And I've given the story of Jesus' betrayal and arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. But actually, the verses I want to concentrate on are just the last two verses. And I wanted the rest of it there just for context, so that you knew what was going on. So actually, what I want to talk about is this story. The story of the young man who is wearing this linen cloth, and he's following Jesus, but then gets scared and runs away, and someone grabs the cloth off him and he runs off naked. It's the most random little story maybe in the Bible, right? And I've never heard a sermon on this, which is really good for me, because usually when I speak, I try and find something a bit unusual, a bit different that no one's said about a passage before. This felt easier because I've never heard anyone speak on it, so I can say whatever I want. Has anyone heard this passage spoken on in a sermon? No one. There was one person in the 8:30 actually. But so one person out of two services who's heard this passage preached on before. So that's good for me, because I can say whatever I want. Right. So this is the story that I want to grab hold of today. And I want to do it for two reasons. Because I'm leaving you guys, in body at least, maybe not in my heart. So thank you for everything you've done for us. So I wanted to say something about me and my journey and what this means to me. But also, I want to say something about what it might mean for you, and not only for you, for everybody, for the whole of humanity. So when we first started having conversations about curacy, and we met, Rachel and I had Richard Peniston, the vicar at St. Chad's, and his wife Nels over for dinner. Some months ago now. And we were sitting out in the garden. I mean, you can tell it was a long time ago if we were in the garden. It's last sort of September time. And Richard asked Rachel if she could sum up my theology in like what I believe about God in one sentence. And she replied immediately, and I didn't really realize that she had this thought about what I believed. And she said, I'm sorry if I don't quote you exactly, Rach. She said, he wants to see people become the human beings they were created to be. Is that roughly what you said? Yeah, about right. And I was struck. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I believe. I didn't realize I put it across so strongly. That is exactly what I want. I think this passage shows that. So, firstly, me. Let's start with me. So when you read like commentaries or any books about this passage, all of them are kind of obsessed with this idea, well, who is this guy? Who is this certain young man? And there's all sorts of theories flying around. I was speaking to Simon before the service on the sound desk, and he was saying, well, like, a lot of people think it's Mark himself. And he's right, like, that is a theory that goes around, and some people throw out different names and possibilities. Honestly, I was like, well, actually, I know who it is. I know who this certain young man is. Of course I know him. He's me. Right? Because that phrase, a certain young man, it doesn't happen in Greek in the original translation of the Bible, but in English it's a bit ambiguous. It means a particular young man. But it can also mean, well, certain can also mean something else. And that was me. I mentioned faith a minute ago, about how faith and doubt actually work well together. But very often in my life, I've been at the opposite end of that. I've been a certain young man. And I've learned gradually over the years to let go of that certainty. And I'm still working on it. Because what certainty does is it makes you rely on yourself. It means that you are very confident in your own abilities, in your own intellect, in your own skills. And I don't want to be like that. I want to rely on someone else. I mean, someone else, like the big someone else. And this is what it is in the actual Greek. It's neoniskos. You don't really need to know that, but it'll be helpful later. And it says that he's wearing nothing but a linen cloth. And the way I kind of thought about this was, well, this is what we do when we're certain about stuff, right? We put these clothes around ourselves and we think they protect us from the elements. We think that we have this safety because we know who we are and we know what we believe and everything's going to be okay. But the problem is, things happen to you that shake that. And they can be terrible, awful things. And what happens to your firm belief when you've wrapped it around yourself? It gets shaken. And that's inevitable. And that's happened to me through my life, in small ways and in enormous ways. I can be trucking along and be like, oh, I'm okay actually, because I know what I'm doing. I can rely on myself. It's okay. And you kind of forget and you almost ignore that death or disaster is looming around the corner. And so when something happens, like when someone has dug up your father's carrots in the garden, I'm telling this story entirely because my brother is here this morning, and your father blames you instead of the person that did it, and you enter this dark, dark place, your certainty gets shaken. When your parents get divorced, your certainty gets shaken. When you, and when I say you, I mean me, when you're having problems at university because you've picked the wrong people to live with and you are having serious problems with housemates. When your father, and this was a couple of years ago, dies from COVID, you can be rolling through life and suddenly, bosh. And it feels like this. It feels like the world has caught up to you and that linen cloth that you thought was protecting you gets stripped away from you. Because the linen cloth actually is death. That way leads death. If you protect yourself, that's what ends up happening. You enter the dark place with no protection at all, really. Because this is the other place in the Gospel of Mark where a linen cloth is mentioned. It's only one chapter later. Jesus, having been arrested, is then crucified. And they take his body down from the cross and they wrap it in a linen cloth. If you are protecting yourself, as I have consistently through my life, and I'm trying to let go of that, what you're really doing is encasing yourself in death, even though it doesn't look like it. And what happens to the young man is that he runs off naked. He's terrified and he runs away and he's naked. And this is what it feels like, doesn't it? Suddenly you feel vulnerable. Suddenly you feel like you are completely exposed. And it's scary. Well, that's my experience. I suspect that speaks to some of what you've said, of what you've encountered. And CJ, the songs that she picked this morning, like she asked me the other day, what songs do you want? And I was like, I haven't really got time. Can we have this one? You can pick the rest. And the songs she's picked are extraordinary because they've consistently spoken about darkness and how Jesus brings light in darkness. But that's what it feels like. It feels like you're plunged into darkness. And you're so exposed. But there is hope. This story reminds me of another story in the Bible. I'll see if you can guess what story it is. So there's a person, or maybe more than one person. I mean, if you know me, you already know what I'm going to say here, right? And they're in a garden, as this guy is. And God has been betrayed. And they are terrified because they've tried to construct the world with their own strength and their own wisdom, but they realize it's failed and they run off naked. And it leads to death. What story am I talking about? Yeah, the Garden of Eden. This is what happens with Adam and Eve. And it's all of our stories, right? This is why I think it's kind of pointless saying, well, who is the young man? The young man is all of us. He's me. He's also you. He's a young man. He's a young girl. He's an older lady. He's a middle-aged bloke, right? He's all of us. But there is hope because God does not leave it there. Jesus is taken from the cross and wrapped in a linen cloth, and then the women go to his tomb. This dark, dark cave where he has been buried, and they go to find Jesus. And they come to the tomb. And it says that they looked up. I've not put that bit on there, but it says they looked up and saw that the stone had already been rolled away. And I wonder sometimes, do we not see hope because we don't look up? It says that they entered the tomb and they saw an angel dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Saw an angel. Except it doesn't say that, actually. That's my misquote. We expect it to say that because the other Gospels say that. It doesn't say an angel. It says a young man. Mark is doing something extraordinary here. It's the only other time in his gospel that he uses the word neoniskos. He doesn't use angelos, he uses neoniskos. So the women enter the tomb, this darkness, this death, this hopelessness, and they see a young man, and he's not wearing a linen cloth, and he's also not naked. He is dressed in a white robe. Been clothed in something more beautiful, more extraordinary. And he's not running and scared. He is seated on the right side. On the right side is, in a monarchy, in a kingdom, sitting on the right is the position of power. It's the next most powerful person after the king or queen. And this says a couple of things. This says that God can not only restore me and you and the whole of humanity to what they were created to be, exactly what Rachel said that my theology was. This is who we were made to be. But also that the throne room of God is in the place that you least expect it. That it's in the grave. Because Jesus, the King, goes all the way down to the grave for us and sets up his throne in it. And from that place of darkness and death that we enter, that we feel at various times in our lives when a family member gets cancer, when a friend betrays you, whatever it might be, that's where we find God. Standing there, ready to dress us in a white robe. And the women are alarmed. Right? Understandably. But this guy, who in the garden ran naked and afraid, says to them, do not be alarmed. Do not be afraid. This is what Jesus wins for us. That even in the place of death, we are not naked and running and frightened. We are seated and dressed in glorious white and not afraid. And I'm gradually, very gradually, learning that for myself. And I think it's what God has in mind for the whole of humanity. What a future that is. How do we share that with everybody else? I don't think we can until we learn it for ourselves in our own hearts. So, I wasn't really sure how to respond this morning. I don't think coming up and getting naked would be appropriate. Although, what a way to leave. You'd never forget it, right? So I'm going to leave the response to you because I think that part of this as well is that God gives us agency. God gives us free will and the means with which to spread this ourselves and to ourselves. And so I think an appropriate response might actually be just, let's sing worship to the God that does this. And if you want to stand or sit or kneel or whatever you want to do, maybe dance in thankfulness that this is what Jesus has done. That's what we should do. And thank you for all the ways in which you have taught me this stuff. I've learned this from seeing your faith and the ways in which you act in the world and in the community. So thank you. And I'll take that with me. And I didn't think I was going to cry, but I'm pretty flipping close. Right. Okay, let's pray. And then, Siege, if you would like to come up and we will sing to the God who makes this possible. Father, thank you. Thank you that in our darkest spaces, you are there. In our most vulnerable and naked times, it's where you are available. Would you give us the courage to know that actually you can only clothe us when we take off our own clothing, metaphorically. Would you give us the courage to be vulnerable before you? Would you give us the joy and the hope and the excitement that this is what you have in store for all of us, that the people that Adam and Eve were created to be is still possible. You don't have a plan B. What you're doing is resurrecting plan A. Would you inspire us? Would you give us creativity to cascade this hope to the world? And would you give us the courage, even when we don't fully understand it, because actually certainty might not be the best thing in the world. We worship a mysterious God, and we want to worship you as a mystery. Would you give us the courage to hold our faith open-handedly like teenagers do? And to show the world what is possible when a broken person trusts a resurrected God. In your name, amen.